my name is Kenzie and welcome to a watercolor tutorial, and today we're going to be painting this holly. This is a very simple, straightforward watercolor tutorial. We're going to be messing around a little bit with the scooping for highlights and then also blotting for the wet on wet technique. Feel free to message me your finished piece. I'd love to see what you create. Let's go over our supplies. So right here I have my 2 water cups. I have one for warm, one for cool water. I have here my dryer. I got this on Amazon and I'm able to dry my layers very quickly. I have my tapping cloth where I tap excess water on here handy. I also have my Winsor Newton watercolor palette. You'll see all of these colors that I use inside your ebook that's emailed to you. These are the brushes that I use all the time. I love this particular brush because the bristles are very soft and I can get a very nice pointed tip so I can get lots of detail. So the size I use a lot is size 8, 12, and 4, and this is a silver black velvet brush. I also recommend having masking tape. Any painter's tape from the dollar store works perfectly fine. I like to paint my paintings down. I like when it leaves a border, and it's really nice if you have an extra cardboard sheet handy that you can move your projects around and not be tied down to your desk. You'll also see I'm a messy painter, so this has definitely helped contain some of the mess on my desk.
The first thing that we're going to do is we're going to start mixing up our green color. So I'm going to mix up my sap green. And I already have a little bit of a warm tone to my green in my palette, but I'm going to mix up a bit of sap green. I'm going to bring in a little bit of red. And this is my favorite color to mix with when I'm doing my greeneries. I'm going to bring in a little bit of a hooker's green. I find that this particular shade of green that I'm mixing up, it's a very natural, kind of like an army color. A little bit of brown. I'm going to put a little bit more hooker's green since this is a Christmassy holly. Okay, so the first thing I'm going to do is I am going to start on my leaves. So I'm going to follow the line all the way down. And you're going to see I'm not outlining my leaves. I'm trying to just do as little brush strokes as possible. So when this is still wet, I can come in and tap around different points. I can even get rid of everything on my brush and blend it out a little bit more. And this is the wet on wet technique when we have a wet surface, which was that first green, and then we put another wet surface down, which was that darker green. And then you can play around with different types of techniques. You can come down here and do it again. This time what we can do, if you want to have a really nice highlight, get rid of everything on your brush, scoop up, and now you have a nice highlight. And if you want to, you can even touch, I'm going to mix in a little bit of a darker, you can touch different points as well to make it darker. You can even use a different brush, one for highlight, one for applying the paint too. There you go. So this is a fun one just because you get to kind of mess around with different shades of greens and you get to also experiment with highlights and your shading until you kind of figure it out. And you also can do different points. You can shadow the top of the leaf, the bottom of the leaf, mix in different shades of green, kind of mix it up a bit. This one I added a ton of sap green. So I find I did this at a few workshops and there's a few ladies that really wanted to outline the leaf. If you do that, you might run into the issue of it drying because watercolor paper, it dries really fast, right? So if you do that, you're going to see like the lines and the outlines of the leaf. So it's best if you're doing this piece to try and not outline. Try to just put more pressure on your brush and move pretty fast as well. And you can even just tap, just like that. So I find this one's a little bit too dark compared to my other one, so I'm just gonna scoop. And scoop. Okay, I just made a mistake there, so I'm just gonna freehand a little leaf. So the wet on dry technique is if we were just to come in right here, so we're applying paint on a dry surface, like right now. And that's the wet on dry technique, when you're just painting on a dry surface. And you also find with the wet on dry technique as well, you kind of have to do a lot more scooping, because sometimes when you do the wet on dry, you get more lines and harsh lines, and at least for me and how I like to paint, I don't like to see those lines. But this right here that I'm doing in the moment, this is wet on wet, because I'm putting wet paint on a dry surface, wet surface. Whoa. So you'll also see here, I'm jumping around and I'm trying to not go in and do ones where it's right next to each other, because I don't want these colors to just bleed. I want them to dry, because with the wet on wet, remember, if it's wet and wet, it will just like bleed and blend really softly. But if I paint this sleeve and then I come in and I want to paint like this sleeve and they touch, all that green color just kind of, again, bleed and blend, and then you won't get that nice crisp line of the leaf. So this one's dry, so now I can come in and do this one. And some of them I am going to come in and apply a second layer. I'm just going to have to wait for it to dry. And when you want to have more layers and you want to add depth to it, you typically use the wet on dry technique as well. You want to make sure that all of your layers are dried, and then you can add more depth. Okay, so another thing that we can do, if you're happy with how this has turned out, that's great. But if you're feeling like yours is just a little too dull and you want there to be just a little bit more vibrancy, that's when we can come in and add more depth. So you can come in now, mix up a little bit of a darker tone, mix in a darker green. And then this is the wet on dry technique as well. So this is when you're going to apply a color on your leaf. And do you see now that I have that harsh line? I don't like the harsh lines when I paint. So I'm just going to come in and just touch the edge right here and scoop it out just like that. And now I have a soft blend between my colors. So I'm going to look around my piece, like right here. This leaf is supposed to be behind, so it should be darker. So I'm going to come in, just touching the line. You see how I'm not going in the middle. I'm just touching that harsh line and I scooped it away. I'm going to do it again in here. I have that harsh line using just water. I'm going to touch just that line to blend it out. Maybe add some depth up here. And then you can just come around any leaf that you just feel like it's just a little bleh. Come in and add some more depth to it. Okay, fun. So we're going to move on to the bow now, and same thing that we talked about down here. We want to work in sections so that we have some really crisp lines for our bow. So I'm going to come in and mix up in my palette a nice deep vibrant red. And I'm going to apply that color over here first. And we're going to do that same scooping technique that we just did as well. I just find it's just the easiest and a really effective way to get a good highlight. I'm going to come in with nothing on my brush and I'm going to scoop. I'm going to come on the other side. And scoop. And what I can do as well is I can come in and mix up a burgundy color. So I'm going to mix in a little bit of purple and also a little bit of black. I really like how the black looks. And then I can just touch while it's still wet, doing that wet on wet technique, and just touch where the crease is. And because this is wet, we'll have a really nice natural looking blend. And I used quite a bit of water here, so I'm going to come in and actually scoop up a little bit more. And if you want to as well, you can come in and add a little bit more vibrancy to the top. Let's bow. And if you have harsh lines, you can come in and blend it out with just some water. Another way that we can do it with that wet on wet technique and wet on dry technique is we can come in and just leave some gaps. So you can, for example, you can come in like this you can come in like this, on both sides. See how I'm leaving that gap? Get rid of everything on your brush and just touching your edge. You can blend it out. And you see how I'm not going into my middle? I'm just touching this line. Try to soften it up. And this is how you can create a really intense highlight, by letting there be some white space, which is the page, be your white, and just kind of focusing, shadowing around it. I'm just going to add a little bit of red. Then we can add a nice deep burgundy color. So try out both of those and see which one you prefer. When I want something to be super intense and bright, I definitely use that wet on dry one. But I also find that the wet on dry one's the easiest, because all you just got to do is get rid of everything on your brush and just tap. Versus trying to figure out the blending, it could be pretty tricky. Okay, I'm tapping right underneath my bow now. Oh, I like how bright this red is. Now I can scoop. Just like that. And then I want to come around and do back here. And I'm just going to do a line. I'm not going to fill it all the way in. I need more water on my brush. There we go. I'm going to come in here and do my little line. And in here. And I'm going to dry this so I can move on to final details. And then for my knot, I can come in and either scoop, or you can leave a little bit of white space. And again, just touch the edge, whichever one you prefer. So if you're happy with your bow, you can definitely leave it, or you can add a second layer and really make it pop. So for example, you can come in now and you can do that wet on dry technique. I'm just going to do both sides since I already have the paint on my brush. And work fast if you want to. You can work in sections if you work a little bit slower. Everything on my brush, then I can just blend this out. And you see by using that second layer, everything is just a little bit more vibrant. And then right underneath my knot area right here, I'm going to come in and apply that burgundy so it looks like there's a crease in it. And I'm going to bring this dark color all the way down by just blending it out. Because it is supposed to look like it's behind, not the main focus. Okay, there you have it, your holly. I hope you had fun. Feel free to send me some photos of your completed work. I hope you enjoyed this and enjoyed messing around with different shades and practicing your wet on wet and wet on dry technique.